Maoism or Leninism? English Marxist, 2022. Posted on medium.com September 20, 2022, at English Hojaist. Maoism or Leninism? Introduction. A rather common mistake when confronting and analyzing Maoist principles is not identifying the differences between Mao Zedong thought and Maoism. The first principle is a philosophy that is identifiable with Mao himself, taking Marxism-Leninism to the concrete conditions of China, which before Mao was a disunified and stagnant state separated between warlord factions feuding for state power, and a war-torn and recovering nation-state ruled by Chiang Kai-shek. Maoism on the other hand is seen as a progression of Lenin's theory of imperialism and is therefore universally applicable, with the additions to the original philosophy being continuing of revolution and class struggle during proletarian dictatorship, the two-line struggle, and the universality of protracted people's war, thus creating Marxism-Leninism Maoism as a universally applicable philosophy. It is also a common mistake among the followers of it, however, to identify if Mao actually progressed these theories or merely adopted it, and it must be identified first and foremost, to show how much it can distort Marxism-Leninism, which has bred the opportunist line of J. Werner and the Chicago Study Group's slanderous Hojaism or Leninism. Continuing of revolution and class struggle under the dictatorship of the proletariat. Mao's views on the defense and consolidation of the proletarian dictatorship are seen as his most invaluable contributions which propel Marxism-Leninism to a higher stage. For example, it is stated at the 9th Congress of the Communist Party of China he had, quote, "for the first time clearly demonstrated in the theory and practice of the international communist movement that after the essential completion of the socialist transformation of the system of ownership of the means of production, classes and the class struggle still exist and that it is necessary for the proletariat to continue the revolution." Report at the 9th Party Congress of the CP of China, in Important Documents of the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, Peking 1970, p. 13. This was also recognized by Marshal Lin Biao, quote, countering the fallacy put forward by Liu Shaoqi in 1956 that in China, the question of which wins out, socialism or capitalism, is already solved. Chairman Mao specifically pointed out, the question of which will win out, socialism or capitalism, is still not really settled. The class struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, the class struggle between the different political forces, and the class struggle in the ideological field between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie will continue to be long and torturous and at times will even become very acute. Lin Biao, report to the 9th National Congress of the Communist Party of China, delivered on April 1 and adopted on April 14, 1969. However, this is not true. Mao had not discovered that class struggle continues under the dictatorship of the proletariat. To cite just one example, Joseph Stalin in 1936 delivered a speech for the draft constitution of the USSR. While addressing the changes of life in the Soviet Union from 1924 to 1936, he says, quote, "In conformity with these changes in the economic life of the USSR, the class structure of our society has also changed. The landlord class, as you know, had already been eliminated as a result of the victorious conclusion of the Civil War. As for the other exploiting classes, they have shared the fate of the landlord class. The capitalist class in the sphere of industry has ceased to exist. The kulak class in the sphere of agriculture has ceased to exist. And the merchants and profiteers in the sphere of trade have ceased to exist. Thus all the exploiting classes have been eliminated. There remains the working class. There remains the peasant class. There remains the intelligentsia." J.V. Stalin, on the Draft Constitution of the Soviet Union, Works, Volume 14, London 1978, p. 60. Stalin has thus clearly identified the existence of classes even after the liquidation of exploiting classes. The liquidation of the exploiting classes does not mean the abolition of classes in its entirety, nor the dulling or weakening of the class struggle. In his March 1937 paper on the deficiencies of party work, Stalin explicitly opposes this theory. He exclaims, quote, "It is necessary to smash and throw aside this theory that the class struggle must become more and more extinguished with every step of our advance, that the enemy becomes tamer and tamer as we achieve success. On the contrary, the more we advance, The more we achieve successes, the greater the fury of the remnants of the shattered exploiting classes. J.V. Stalin, Defects in Party Work and Measures for Liquidating Trotskyite and Other Double Dealers, Works, Volume 14, p. 136. In the USSR, Stalin and the CPSU, waged war against the vestiges of exploiting classes and agents of imperialism in order to rid the Soviet Union of the Tsarist and Bolshevik-era hardships of peasant land hunger and the minority of an organized proletariat. Therefore the claim of Mao recognizing further antagonisms in class structure while building socialism is false. In fact, the Communist Party of China even criticized Stalin at first for this recognition. In 1956 the party stated, quote, "After the elimination of those classes, it should not have been emphasized that the class struggle was coming to a head, as Stalin did, with the result that the healthy development of socialist democracy was hindered." The Communist Party of the Soviet Union is absolutely right in correcting Stalin's mistakes in this respect. More on the historical experience of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Peking, November 1956, p. 55. If the CP of China first followed Khrushchev's theory on the class structure and coexistence, Mao's later views on Marxism would prove to be distortions in themselves. 1. The two-line struggle within the party. For the Chinese revisionists, the two-line struggle was a concept that defined a party that would constantly have representatives of classes in its ranks that would inevitably have to be combated in correlation with the continuation of class struggle. Parties, of course, must be unified as an effective organ ideologically without the risk of factionalism. On the other hand, Mao maintains that by law, there must always be two lines in the party and is precisely a law of development. Mao stated, quote, "Outside a party, other parties exist, within a party groupings exists. This has always been the case. Each grouping forms the wing of a class." Mao Zedong, quoted in The Rulers, Honky No. 6 1976. This is dangerous. When anti-party trends, revisionists, and careerists emerge within the party, it is justifiable and correct to expunge and punish them according to the crimes committed, and is the correct party approach. Mao with this lazy theory allowed reactionary trends to run posts within the party. Deng Xiaoping, Lin Biao, Zhou Enlai, Wang Ming, and Li Lisan in a non-exhaustive list. In the same resolution on April 7, 1976, where Mao agreed Deng was a dangerous capitalist representative of the party, he was allowed to be rehabilitated and representative of the party. It states that Mao, quote, allowed him, however, to retain his party membership in order to see how he behaves in the future. Peking Review No. 15 1976, p.3. This is incompatible with any structure of the Communist Party. Lenin, in summing up the experience of Bolshevism stated, quote, "If you have in your ranks reformists, Mensheviks, it is impossible to be victorious in the proletarian revolution, it is impossible to assert it, this is obviously certain in principle." V.I. Lenin, quoted by Stalin in Foundations of Leninism, Works, Volume 6, p. 163. With regard to the PRC, where this outlook was never taken into consideration with few exceptions, notably in Shanghai, during the Cultural Revolution, Mao and in turn Maoism, rejects the seriousness of bourgeois elements within the party, with favor of somehow overpowering these deviations through active ideological struggle. This resulted in the modern and rotten revisionist character of the Chinese Communist Party today, all completely facilitated within Mao's lifetime, and therefore bears great responsibility for this development. New Democracy. During the long protracted struggle and closing chapters of the Chinese Civil War, the CCP identified the enemy classes as landlords and bureaucrat capitalists. These capitalists, according to Mao, consisted of four ruling families, the Chiang, Sung, Kung, and Chen, who controlled sectors of the economy nationalized by the Kuomintang after the defeat of Japanese imperialism in China. However, in the new democratic state, as Mao proclaimed, the proletariat would have to, quote, form a united front with the national bourgeoisie against imperialism and the bureaucrat and warlord governments without overlooking its revolutionary quality. Mao Zedong, on New Democracy, January 1940, in Selected Works, Volume 2, Peking, 1965, p. 348-49. Mao also held that a united front against imperialism should include not only the urban national bourgeoisie, but also the rural national bourgeoisie, the rich peasants, kulaks as well. Quote, "The rich peasant form of production will remain useful for a definite period. Generally speaking, they might make some contribution to the anti-imperialist struggle of the peasant masses and stay neutral in the agrarian revolutionary struggle against the landlords. Therefore we should not regard the rich peasants as belonging to the same class as the landlords and should not prematurely adopt a policy of liquidating the rich peasantry." Mao Zedong, The Chinese Revolution and the Chinese Communist Party, December 1939, in Selected Works, Volume 2, Peking, 1965, p. 323. However, in China's case, the preservation of the national bourgeoisie was guaranteed, unlike the development of socialism in the USSR and elsewhere, which in turn also contributed to the degeneration of the CCP itself. With this in mind, a red carpet was neatly rolled for the beginning of bureaucracy within the state apparatus. Quote, "Our general program of new democracy will remain unchanged throughout the stage of the bourgeois democratic revolution, that is, for several decades." Mao Zedong, On Coalition Government, April 1945, in Selected Works, Volume 3, Peking, 1965, Op. Cit. p. 285. Yet again the Chinese Communist Party took a dangerous road in the field of class collaboration. However, it is important to discuss the different experiences of the Soviet Union and China. Similarly to China, the Soviet apparatus was left in an underdeveloped state due to a long-lasting civil war which devastated the livelihood of both the proletariat and peasantry. And thus the adoption of the new economic policy was introduced to provide a boon to help nurture a new rising proletariat and industry. The fundamental difference, however, was that Lenin had recognized the danger of an unchecked capitalist class in his codification of the policy. He states, quote, "The whole question is who will take the lead. We must face this issue squarely, who will come out on top. Either the capitalists succeed in organizing first, in which case they will drive out the communists and that will be the end of it. Or the proletarian state power, with the support of the peasantry, will prove capable of keeping a proper rein on those gentlemen, the capitalists, so as to direct capitalism along state channels and to create a capitalism that will be subordinate to the state and serve the state." Lenin's Collected Works Volume 33, The New Economic Policy and the Tasks of the Political Education Department, 2nd English edition, Progress Publishers, Moscow, 1965, p. 66. The alertness of the CPSU, b. to predatory capitalist elements collaborating with the party was then continued under Stalin, where he stated, quote, "The class of proletarians does not and cannot share power with other classes. The party of the proletariat, the party of the communists does not and cannot share leadership with other parties." J.V. Stalin, Concerning Questions of Leninism, January 1926, in Collected Works, Volume 8, Moscow, 1954, p. 27, 28. But under the revisionist guise of new democracy, which is treated as a development by Maoists, this is the opposite of what would happen. Quote, "The national bourgeoisie differs from the imperialists, the landlords and the bureaucrat capitalists. The contradiction between the national bourgeoisie and the working class is one between exploiter and exploited, and is by nature antagonistic. But in the concrete conditions of China, this antagonistic contradiction between the two classes, if properly handled, can be transformed into a non-antagonistic one and be resolved by peaceful methods." Mao Zedong, On the Correct Handling of Contradictions Among the People. Thus, Mao had by then reaffirmed that the alliance with the national bourgeoisie was to remain, in contrast to Marxism-Leninism's immediate positions on the subject. Mao had painted a pleasant and peaceful transition of state power to socialism in China and to his own detriment, facilitated a revisionist counter-revolution that was bound to take place. The defenders of this revisionism, J. Werner and laughable slander. The Marxist-Leninist-Maoist trend today sees the Hoja criticism of Mao's socialism as merely a hatchet job of distortions, The source of this thinking, however, is the arch-opportunist himself, J. Werner, in his work Beat Back the Dogmato-Revisionist Attack on Mao Zedong Thought. He firstly declares that Hoxha had problems with Mao's leadership and implies his friendship with a fellow anti-revisionist power, China, was an opportunist one to cement his own gain. But the biggest slander of all is that he believes Hoxha had a problem with the CCP from the beginning. Full stop. Werner states, quote, "According to Enver Hoxha, the Chinese Communist Party has been dominated by the revisionist Mao Zedong thought since 1935, the year in which Mao's leadership was basically established within the party." Apparently, the correct line, according to Hoxha, was represented by the line of Wang Ming, although the name of this renegade doesn't appear in his book. Beat Back the Dogmato-Revisionist Attack on Mao Zedong Thought, Chapter 1, Hoxha on the Course of the Chinese Revolution. Now, I'm not sure if our friend J. Werner has actually even read the book he's criticizing. Hoxha clearly states in Imperialism and the Revolution, quote, "Meanwhile, certain other political views and stands of Mao Zedong and the Communist Party of China, which were not compatible with the Marxist-Leninist views and stands of our party, we considered as temporary tactics of a big state, dictated by specific situations. But, with the passage of time, it became ever more clear that the stands maintained by the Communist Party of China were not just tactics." Enver Hoxha, Imperialism and the Revolution, p. 387. So Hoxha was also aware of the unique methods of the CCP in accordance with Lenin's thesis on social revolution. The Wang Ming label he uses merely equates to his dog bark of a criticism because he isn't aware, or is otherwise blissfully ignorant of the anti-Marxist-Leninist diatribe used by Mao to justify the wrecking of his own party. The name doesn't appear in this book because he didn't need to include it. Wang Ming declared Mao a nationalist deviation entirely, while Hoxha equated the nationalist deviation to the three worlds theory. He'd know that if he read the book. Not only this, the RCP dogmatists and arch-opportunist J. Werner zigzag about how such concepts as the purity of the party and of Marxism-Leninism and the monolithic unity in the party are undialectical and bureaucratic. The article eulogizes the negation of the leading role of the party as relying directly on the masses. But simultaneously, the article puts forward the definition of the role of the party, in an arch-bureaucratic and Trotskyite formula that, quote, "Most of the people exercising leadership over particular units are party members, the state planning is done under the leadership of the party, and so forth." Similarly, the party must exercise all-round dictatorship in every sphere of society. RCP. USA. Beat Back the Dogmato-Revisionist Attack on Mao Zedong Thought, The Communist, No. 5, May 1979, p. 86. No, you anti-communist gangster, you cannot negate the dictatorship of the proletariat and replace the leading role of the party, with respect to the working class, with the dictation of force over the working class. The RCP formula of the all-round dictatorship of the party in every sphere of society is a totally anti-Leninist formula. Stalin showed in detail that this formula about the dictatorship of the party has nothing in common with Marxism-Leninism, that this formula is at best only inexact and figurative, hence is almost never used in Marxist literature, and never in such contexts as in every sphere of society. Quote, "Of course, this must not be understood in the sense that the party can or should take the place of the trade unions, the Soviets, and the other mass organizations. The party exercises the dictatorship of the proletariat. However, it exercises it not directly, but with the help of the trade unions, and through the Soviets and their ramifications. Without these transmission belts, it would be impossible for the dictatorship to be at all firm." Quoted from J.V. Stalin, Concerning Questions of Leninism, Sec. V. The Party and the Working Class in the System of the Dictatorship of the Proletariat, Problems of Leninism, pages 178 to 207, Hoxhaism or Leninism? The Class Struggle Journal. A Marxist-Leninist reader of this stripe can understand not even a chapter in, the dogmatic stupidity expunged from this criticism. It opens up with, quote, "Today the Albanians are going beyond polemics. They are now supporters of the Soviet-backed Vietnamese invasion of democratic Kampuchea." A Chicago Study Group, Hoxhaism or Leninism? Section I, It would boggle the principled Marxist on how on earth Vietnam's defense of their own minorities, and Enver Hoxha's verbal and diplomatic support counts as social imperialism. Only Allah knows why Marxist-Leninist Maoists would defend Kampuchea led by Pol Pot, the petty genocidal tyrant who instigated the war in the first place with his massacre in Ba Chuk, killing over 3,000 civilians. Let us remind ourselves, who came to Cambodia's aid after the Vietnamese had pushed the invaders from their lands. It was the Chinese revisionists who tried to open a second front in Vietnam, and after groveling in their own failure to do so, mined the whole northern border. We Marxist-Leninists never called China under Mao a social imperialist state. Even before his collusion with rightist world leaders, he was swayed by the woes of American imperialism. Mao, the greatest Marxist-Leninist, told American journalists in 1944, quote, "We have accepted such things as Darwinism, the democracy exemplified by Washington and Lincoln, the 18th-century philosophy of France, the materialism of Feuerbach, Marxism from Germany, and Leninism from Russia. We accept anything from abroad that can be good for and useful to China. We reject bad things, such as fascism. Such things as the type of communism practiced in Russia are not to be adopted in China, for the conditions in China are not ripe. Conditions are not present for the introduction of communism. Lost chance in China." The World War II Dispatches of John S. Service, p. 256. On top of this, the work also claims that Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai somehow were far from facilitators to Khrushchevite revisionism, and that the Chinese Party, for its part, initially made some tactical concessions for the sake of the unity of the socialist camp. But unlike Hoxha, it was firm on questions of principle. This is yet again another ahistorical slander that only Maoists could conjure up. This is not to say China did not hold a senior role in anti-revisionist struggle in the world after the fact, even despite its collisions with social imperialism in Argentina, Chile, Afghanistan, Thailand and the Philippines, because it did. The fact of the matter is that Mao, in fact, was a facilitator of Khrushchev's revisionism. For example, the party stated, quote, "The 20th Party Congress of the CPSU showed great determination and courage by putting an end to the cult of Stalin, revealing the grave extent of Stalin's mistakes and eliminating their effects." More on the historical experience of the dictatorship of the proletariat, Op. Cit. p. 11. And in the paper, Carrying the Struggle Against Khrushchev's Revisionism to its End of June 1965, it is stated, quote, "We pinned hopes on the new leaders of the CPSU, watched and waited for several months, carrying the struggle against Khrushchev's revisionism to its end." Peking 1965, p. 16. All this clearly shows the facilitation and underestimation of the nature and danger of revisionism. For the Maoites to claim the mantle of consistent repudiation of revisionism doesn't correlate to the facts of the CCP's facilitation to Khrushchev. Mao's revisionism of favoring Bukharinite class collaboration also correlates to this, but that has been discussed in vivid detail in my first article. For the rest of the pamphlet, it goes into detail of Enver Hoxha somehow repudiating the national question, which in my opinion deserves its own project, one that repudiates common myths and slanders of him. Finishing notes. Mao, from his tribulations to the Cultural Revolution, espoused serious deviations from Marxism-Leninism on many fundamental tenets. Though undeniable his heroic struggle against a backstabbing and semi-feudal Chinese state under the Kuomintang and the Japanese reorganized government, he justified by theory and practice the preservation of the bourgeoisie in the party. For a Marxist to add Maoism and developments that weren't even Mao's to begin with, or excuses for exploiting classes to remain, to communist philosophy means to repudiate and spoil future success of the class struggle.